Good evening again, you beautifully restrained disasters, you ticking clocks wrapped in velvet. You who swallowed fire without blinking and dared the world to strike harder. Welcome back to the silence you wear like armor, not because it's easy, but because no one ever saw the war behind your quiet. They watched you stand still, but they never saw the storms beneath your skin, the way your thoughts clashed like steel behind steady eyes. They thought you were numb, but you were nuclear. So how did you stay calm? They ask now, mouths wide open, as if your stillness was a spell, as if silence came without suffering. But they never understood. Your calm was carved, not gifted. Every second of your silence was stitched from rage you refused to unleash. You didn't stay calm because it didn't hurt. You stayed calm because the world wouldn't survive your eruption. You mastered the art of stillness not out of peace, but out of necessity. Because when chaos roared, you didn't match it. You outlasted it. They mistook your quiet for surrender. What they failed to see was the battlefield behind your gaze, the sharp edges beneath your breath, the way you inhaled their madness and exhaled something sharper than revenge. Self-control. You could have screamed. You could have shattered windows with the weight of your rage. But instead you clenched your teeth so hard that entire universes bled behind your smile. It wasn't calm. It was survival. It was the decision to build walls instead of tombstones, to light candles instead of fires, to walk away instead of burn it all down. You watched betrayal dance through rooms where you served nothing but loyalty. And you didn't flinch, not because it didn't break you, but because breaking in public was never part of your plan. Number. You broke in silence, then rebuilt. In shadows. No applause, no audience. Just you. Your ashes, and the unspoken vow. Never again. You walked through hell wearing nothing but your skin, and didn't ask for mercy. You bled dignity. You whispered sanity into the madness, and they mistook it for weakness. They didn't know. You were holding back hurricanes with nothing but breath control. You were swallowing collapse while the world kept asking for one more smile. The silence wasn't peace. It was prison. The calm wasn't comfort. It was containment. Because you knew. Once the dam breaks, nothing will survive the flood. So you bit your tongue until it tasted like rusted steel and unfinished screams. You smiled through betrayal with teeth made of thunder. You nodded while they lied, not because you believed them, but because you had bigger wars to win. And that is the calm they fear. The calm that says, I saw everything, and I still chose silence because my wrath isn't meant for petty. You see, there's a kind of power that doesn't come with noise. It doesn't shout or scream. It sits, it waits, it breathes deep. While the rest of the world plays checkers, you're calculating in chess. You knew they were watching. Not out of love, but curiosity. Waiting for the cracks, for the fall, for the breakdown. But you held still. Not because you weren't wounded, but because you were wise enough to bleed behind closed doors. They mocked your silence because they couldn't understand it. They wanted reaction, emotion, weakness. But what they got was someone too damn dangerous to be understood in real time. You endured each betrayal. You swallowed it like bitter medicine, knowing it was crafting something that couldn't be undone. A version of you they'll never be able to predict again. You built calm on a graveyard of red flags. You taught yourself to hear screaming and still walk like a monk through gunfire. You buried your softness beneath layers of logic, not because you stopped feeling, but because you refused to let them weaponize your warmth ever again. They don't get it, do they? They don't understand the kind of pain that forces someone to become their own sanctuary, to turn their silence into a fortress and their peace into punishment. So now when they ask, how did you stay calm? They want answers wrapped in simplicity, but there's nothing simple about carrying 1,000 heartbreaks and still walking upright. There's nothing soft about holding in screams that could tear down cities. There's nothing easy about staying still when every cell in your body wants to riot. Your calm? It was war. A quiet, calculated rebellion against everything trying to dismantle you. You didn't meditate. You strategized. You didn't breathe deeply. You held your breath while the room filled with poison and still managed to walk out alive. They thought you were passive, but you were surgical, precise, deadly in patience. You watched lies unfold like theater, sat through acts of betrayal like you'd seen the script before. And maybe you had, because this wasn't your first fire. This wasn't the first time you had to become the cold just to keep your soul from shattering. They saw someone calm. What they didn't see was the chains you were breaking. With every second, you chose not to respond. They didn't hear the thunder behind your eyes. They didn't feel the tremors in your fists, clenched under the table, bleeding from holding it all together. But you did, and you never asked them to notice. You weren't staying calm for them. You were staying calm despite them, because you knew the storm wasn't meant to destroy you. It was meant to wake you. And when it did, you didn't run. You walked through the fire like you built the damn flames yourself, not with fear, not with hesitation, but with a stillness so sharp it cut through the smoke like prophecy. You didn't need to run. You didn't need to scream. Because you understood something they never did. Calm is not the absence of chaos. It's dominion over it. You mastered your storms like an artist sketches darkness into beauty. Like a mad king sitting on a throne of silence, dripping with restraint, not because he's weak, but because he's been to war and chose peace as a weapon. Your hands have held rage so violent it would make thunder tremble. Yet you tucked it away, folded it neatly like a letter no one deserved to read. You wore that calm like a crown forged in trauma, like armor painted with every time you bit your tongue instead of burning the world down. They don't see the bruises you earned in the battlefield of silence. The nights your breath felt like broken glass, just trying to exit your lungs without cutting your throat on the way out. They never saw the version of you pacing the room with rage ricocheting off your ribs, or the one staring blank at the ceiling, calculating 1,000 outcomes, and choosing the one that kept your dignity intact. It wasn't serenity, it was survival. And the cost? Oh, the cost was steep. It took pieces of your softness, chunks of your voice, years off your soul, just to stay composed in a world that kept pulling the trigger while pretending their hands were clean. But still, you didn't give them the chaos they were begging for. You sat still, not like a victim, but like a villain who learned how to weaponize silence. Every moment you didn't react was a scarred triumph. Every time you walked away instead of lashing out was a masterpiece of control. They kept poking the beast, thinking you'd growl. But instead, you grinned, because you knew. Real power doesn't bark. It waits, it studies, it breathes deeper than the pain. It sits calmly while the room catches fire, knowing full well that once it stands, nothing will ever look the same again. You weren't passive, you were precise. Your silence wasn't emptiness. It was loaded. It was filled with unread warnings and unspoken decisions that shattered fates, quietly while they laughed in ignorance. You were the calm before the extinction, the moment they'll look back on and realize that was when they lost you. Not when you walked away, not when you blocked them, but when you stopped reacting. That was the death sentence, that was the storm. Because you, my beautifully dangerous anomaly, you didn't need to explode. You just had to vanish with dignity, wrapped in thunder, and leave behind a silence loud enough to haunt them forever. Because they expected you to break, to beg, to cry, to unravel in their hands like thread they could tangle at will. But you didn't. You stood so damn still the wind leaned in to listen. They expected destruction. What they got was detachment, a surgical separation of soul and nonsense. You cut ties so clean, even the lies didn't bleed. And now they wander your silence like a maze with no exit. Each echo, a reminder that they pushed you too far, too often, without ever thinking you'd learn how to disappear. But you did, and not as a whisper, as a lesson. Because you weren't calm by nature. You were calm by evolution. You trained yourself to carry hurt without spilling it. To fold chaos into poetry no one could read but you. You were not born composed. You were carved into stillness by years of being heard wrong, loved wrong, treated like an option, and expected to be grateful for the scraps. So you learned to hold your rage like a sword behind your smile, to let your stillness speak in riddles they were never meant to solve. And when they ask now, why didn't you react? You don't answer. Because you've realized that explanation is a form of begging. And you don't beg for understanding from those who failed to value your silence the first time. Your calm was never for peace. It was prophecy. A quiet warning that when your patience runs dry, it doesn't spill, it erupts. And it takes everything with it except your pride.